morning, and welcome back to the Wellness on Purpose podcast. If you're new to our podcast page, our intention here is to provide you with impactful, educational, and realistic information to help you progress on your journey to live wellness on purpose now and for future generations. My name is Marissa Laughlin. I am a registered holistic nutritionist and your host for this podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. In case you missed our last episode, we sat down with Jenn Drummond from Assured Naturals to talk all about hormonal imbalances. So if you're out there listening and you are struggling with irregular periods, cramping, PMS symptoms, or menopausal symptoms such as hot flashes or night sweats, I highly recommend you go back and take a listen to part 1. It really does work synergistically with balancing stress as well as your thyroid, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So we are going to welcome Jenn back onto this podcast to share her wealth of information on how to manage your stress naturally. Everything from how your body actually responds to stress mentally, physically, emotionally, what happens when the body's under stress for a long period of time, what endocrine glands are affected when we're under stress, and how to manage our stress in an ideal, realistic way without trying to remove a million things from our lifestyle, our schedule, and our diets. So without further ado, let's welcome Jenn back onto the podcast. Hello, Jenn. How are you today? Welcome back.
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Just in case some of our listeners missed part 1, can you give our listeners a little bit of info about yourself, who you are, and also about Womensense as a company?
Sure. So I've been working in the natural health industry for about 12 years now. I work for a company called Assured Natural Distribution, and we are a distribution company that distributes 11 different brands of supplements. We're owned by Natural Factors, which a lot of people will recognize that brand. And one of the brands that we carry is called Womensense, which is what we're going to mainly be focusing on today, and which we focused on in part 1 as well. I'm also a holistic nutritionist, and I'm also a precision nutrition certified level 1 coach. So I have a little bit of background in that area as well. And the Womensense brand specifically has been around for about 18 years now. It was started with a small family-owned company and then ended up being adopted by Assured Natural. And it was one of the first women's hormone brands that launched in Canada. There's lots of different brands in that category now, but we were one of the first. And we're a Canadian company. Our head office is in just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. And we also have our own organic farms in Kelowna, BC, which I think is kind of a cool thing where we grow a lot of our own organic herbs that we actually use inside of a lot of our formulations. So that's pretty neat. Something else that I always like to mention about Womensense and all our brands really, including Natural Factors, is that we have a certification called ISURA, and it's a not-for-profit organization that is third-party testing that tests for over 500 contaminants in all of our products. So that includes GMOs, they test for pesticides, they test for heavy metals. So there's over 500 altogether. And you'll see on all the bottles, it has a little ISURA label. So if you ever see that now, you know what it means. It just means that the product has been third-party tested. And a lot of supplement companies, I actually don't know of any others that do this. So I think that that is pretty unique to us. So you can make sure that you know what's on the label is actually in the product and that you're not getting any contaminants in there at all. So I love that. And then something else I want to touch on with Womensense is that we donate a portion of all sales to the Canadian Women's Foundation, which is a really cool not-for-profit organization that helps get women out of violent situations. They have programs that help build young girls' confidence. They help with human trafficking. They support shelters for women and children to go to that are leaving abusive relationships. They do all sorts of really cool things. So every time you buy a bottle of Womensense, you are donating a portion of a donation basically to that not-for-profit to do all these wonderful things in our country. So I love that we do that. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know that about Womensense, and I love so much when brands take it just one step further to give back and to support our country and our communities. So I think that's fantastic. And also, I just want to quickly highlight the importance of the ISURA certification, because a lot of people have maybe no idea about the manufacturing process that happens during, creating supplements. And there are some different regulations out there, and there's also not regulations. So some supplements can have fillers and preservatives and colors and flavors in there that aren't natural and actually can be synthetically made or cause more issues to your health. So being, mindful of the companies that you're investing in your money in to make sure that you're actually getting what's on the label. I think it's so important when you're really buying those products to support your health. So that's amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. Now, on our previous podcast episode, we had Jenn on, and she talked about hormonal imbalances in women's cycles. And we talked all about things that can contribute to these hormonal imbalances, how to know if you're having a hormonal imbalance, but also how you can support your body naturally to bring it back in rhythm. And one of the biggest contributing factors to hormonal imbalances is stress. And that's something that we're going to dive into today, because I think our listeners and so many people that I know in store, my clients, friends, family, everybody is facing so much stress, especially over the last year and a half of trying to adapt to the rest of the world and what we had kind of thrown at us with the pandemic. So stress is huge. And I think everybody can relate to having stress, whether it is, financially, relationships, education, literally anything in their life. A lot of people can relate to that. So let's start there. Let's talk about stress. What actually happens to the body when it is in a state of stress, mentally, physically, emotionally? What happens?
Yeah, so stress is huge. It's such a big issue that we're all dealing with. And it's funny, I think we're so used to it that oftentimes when you ask somebody, like, if I were to ask somebody, like, how's your stress? Like most people say, oh, it's okay, unless they're going through something really major, like they're losing a loved one, or you know what I mean? They're going through major loss, or if there's nothing like that's super obvious, most people will say, my stress is, it's okay. I don't think we realize how much stress we are under on a day-to-day basis in modern day society. So I think that in of itself is an issue, because we don't actually necessarily realize how stressed we are. We just go about our day-to-day life, busy, jumping from thing to thing, not even really checking in with ourselves, not even really taking that time to be like, how am I feeling? How is my body feeling on a physiological level? Like, what am I experiencing in my body? So many people are so disconnected from their bodies that they don't even really know what they're experiencing. So I think that's just something so interesting to bring up, is that a lot of people probably listening to this are like, well, I'm not that stressed. Now with the pandemic, I think that's different. I think most people can say, yes, over the last year and a half, they can probably say, yes, I had a very stressful year, especially I would say young families, people with young children, having their kids home all the time, the homeschooling, the teachers trying to homeschool. But you know what, even elderly people that live alone, that's so stressful that they weren't able to see their families. And I think nobody escaped stress in the last year and a half, no matter what your situation is. Medical research suggests that up to 90% of all illness and disease is stress related. So we've heard things like heart attacks can be caused by stress, right? So we've heard like major things like cancers can actually be caused and brought on by stress. Talking about hormonal imbalances, those can be caused by stress. Gut issues are huge. And I'm sure that you've seen a lot of people that, in your practice that have gut issues. I think most people have something going on with their gut, and that is because our digestive system actually gets shut off when we're under a lot of stress. The body's not prioritizing breaking down foods when we're living in fight or flight mode, right? Like we're fleeing from the bear, we're not focused on breaking down our food. So kind of like affects everything in the body, really. Like it can increase your heart rate, it can increase your blood pressure, it can make you sweat, it can alter your hormones, it can alter your mood, it can has changes in our brains, right? Causing mental health disorders. Think about all of the mental health issues, depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, even things like schizophrenia. Like there's so many things that are connected to stress and how we cope with stress and how we handle and manage our stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like what you said in terms of, people just live in a day-to-day life where stress is normal for them. They can't even think about what it's like to not live in that state of stress. And you just get used to it and adapt your lifestyle and your mood or your routine to stress. And really, like if you're someone listening and thinking, oh yeah, I've changed something in my lifestyle just to, try to adapt my stress. And what I mean by that is, maybe you stay an hour later at work to try to reduce your stress by getting a deadline done. Yes, that looks like you're reducing your stress, but you're still, getting an hour out of your evening of downtime. You might be losing an hour of sleep. Like you're compromising something else to try to manage your stress. And I can really relate to that as like an A-type personality. I thrive at that fast pace, that go tight deadlines. I prefer to multitask. I love that like rush, but the crash of that rush after is so substantial. I usually end up getting sick or, very, very fatigued, and it's almost not worth it. So what are some signs and symptoms that our listeners should be mindful of when their body is trying to tell them that they're under a state of stress?
Yeah. So, our body always keeps the score. So like you were saying, you might be go, 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 and you think you're getting away with it. Like you said, you're doing one thing, but you're compromising another. Eventually it does catch up with you because our bodies do keep the score over a period of time. So whether we realize it or not, I think people can relate to the obvious signs of stress. So like heart palpitations, or like I said, sweating or clamminess, that feeling of nervousness or that feeling of anxiety, right? That like, even if you don't have kind of a diagnosed anxiety, I think we've all had times where we're feeling anxious. You've got something coming up, or you've got a deadline that you have to finish something, or maybe there's a major life event coming up, or maybe you're worried about somebody. I know for me, I'm a worrier. I worry about a lot of things. That creates a lot of anxiety. Sometimes people will feel muscle tightness, and they might not feel it right away. Sometimes when you're working at your computer and your shoulders are up to your ears, right? You're clenching, your body's clenching, and people don't even know they do it. They don't even know they do it. That people clench their jaw, right? And they get jaw pain. I think muscle soreness is one. Like if you always feel like you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tight, or you have pain that moves around in the body. I think sometimes it can be from tight muscles, right? You're clenching all day long. Inflammation going on. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. There's so many different conditions that are related to inflammation. Headaches, dizziness, sleep disturbances, mood disturbances, hormonal imbalances, like we talked about on the first podcast. I think there's just so many things. And I think one thing I just wanted to say is just, I think the importance of checking in with your body and getting back inside your body. Like so many of us, and I'm so guilty of this. I live in my head. I'm always like the to-do list and all the things I have to do. I have 2 young children, and so I work full time. And so just the to-do lists are constant and never ending. And I think it's so helpful to just come back into your body, even just for 5 minutes, even just for 2, if you can do 2, and take some deep breaths, close your eyes, and come back into your body and kind of a little bit of a body scan, right? Like, how are you feeling? Like, does something feel tight? Are your shoulders up to your ears? Is your breathing really shallow? I think that's a big one, where a lot of us are chest breathers and we breathe right into our chest and we don't breathe into our belly. That alone is going to affect the body, because when you breathe into your abdomen, it's telling your nervous system that you're okay, right? When we're chest breathing or we're breathing rapidly, we're telling our body that we're in danger. So I think just even little check-ins to kind of even be able to acknowledge what's going on inside the body and just being aware, because I think that's the biggest thing. I think people are not aware of, except like I said, the bigger symptoms. I think it's not until something's clobbering you over the head, like you, Marissa, like you wait until you're like, you're down and out before you're like, oh, my body was trying to tell me something. But if you look back, I bet you there were little whispers along the way. And I think we can connect the dots later. But I think if we can kind of just take a little bit of time each day, like I said, it doesn't have to be long, even 3 minutes of just breathing and checking in with like, okay, what is going on inside my body right now?
Yeah, I think checking in with yourself is so important because we are stimulated and looking for gratification externally anywhere we can get it, like our jobs, our relationships, our environments. We are constantly, literally looking out for things and trying to grab onto things. And in my practice, one task I always give to my clients, like right off the bat, is to be like, you need to start to meditate or just sit in a quiet space for 3 minutes a day. And we're not going to do anything else until you can do that, because until you create that environment where you're like, okay, I'm going to actually check in with myself, how I'm feeling, my emotions, how my body is actually feeling. Like, inflammation is huge. People don't even realize that they're inflamed until they look at their hands and their fingers are swollen so much, or there's so much retention in their feet or their legs. Like, until you actually pause and check in with yourself, you're so disconnected from your mind and your body that it's actually scary to not make that connection sooner, because it does take something so pivotal that's, dangerous for people, whether it's like a condition, a heart attack, getting sick in some sort, that really makes you be like, okay, what could I have done to prevent me from getting to that point? So what would be some long-term effects that people should be mindful of if they're not addressing their stress starting today?
Yeah, like just some of the things that you just mentioned, like heart disease or a heart attack or a stroke, or being diagnosed with diabetes, just becoming a diabetic, cancers, right? Like just getting like sometimes like chronic unchecked stress will eventually, like I said, the body keeps a score. It will eventually lead to something. And just want to encourage people not to wait until things get to that point, right? Where things are so out of balance in the body that maybe there's no turning back. Maybe the damage is done. I think the body has a tremendous capacity to heal. However, don't wait till it gets there, right? Because you might not be able to fully heal. And then too, when that happens, it's such a drastic change to your life, whether you have to be off work and you can no longer work because of your major health condition that's been caused and brought on by stress, right? Like there's so many impacts to life once things get to that point. Whereas if you can target it earlier, when your body's giving you those whispers, if you can listen, learn to listen, like you said, like even just 3 minutes a day. And I'm sure a lot of listeners, and I know I can include myself in that, the thought of sitting still and just being with myself and being present makes me want to crawl out of my skin sometimes, right? But people like me and people that are listening that can relate to that, we're the people that need it. You're the people that need to do it the most, because especially in this age of electronics, right? Like I've seen it in my children, especially over the last year and a half with online learning and constantly being glued to a screen. My husband and I working full time, trying to manage everything. There's been a lot of screens in their life. And even I've noticed it in their attention span and their inability to be bored, right?
Yes.
Like how do you be bored? Like they don't know what to do with themselves unless they have an electronic in front of their face, right? We left a cottage on the weekend, and the first thing they said when they got in the car is, "Yay, we're going home to internet," right? My kids are 8 and 6. They're excited about going home to the internet. I'm like, they're not even teenagers. So adults are no different. We talk about how it's so important for kids to be off of screens and have that screen-free time. Well, it is just as important for adults, and we are just as addicted, if not more, I think, because we all have a cell phone. And I just think, you ever look around a doctor's waiting room or anywhere you have to wait, what is every single person in the room doing? Looking at a phone. We can't just sit anymore. And I'm not saying I'm excluded from that. I find it hard to just sit and be, right?
Yeah, it's very hard. And I think people forget about all the other external factors to stress, because we can think about, deadlines, relationships, finances. Those are all stresses that a lot of people can resonate with. But there are so many other ways in which we expose our mind and our body to stress. So what would you say are some of those external factors that people might not be thinking about that actually increases stress on the body?
Yeah. So I think one of the big ones would be exercise, right? Like I think that that's something that people think of as a good thing, and exercise is a great thing. Don't get me wrong, but it is a stressor. Exercise is a stressor to the body, which is why you get things like muscle soreness after a workout, right? Your body is adapting to the load that you've just put on your body. Things like just little day-to-day things like constantly running late. Like if you're the person that hits snooze 15 times before you get out of bed, you're starting your day already in a state of panic and stress before you've even gotten out of bed. And then we all know what that feeling is like, right? The race through the morning, it affects everything, because now you haven't had time to nourish your body properly. Maybe you didn't drink that glass of water and hydrate first thing. Maybe you didn't have time to prepare some nourishing food. So you're grabbing the coffee and the muffin on the way to work. And then you get to work and you're diving right into work, right? So if you're that person who's pressing snooze most days or always running late, like think of how anxious you feel when you're running late, right? It is not a nice feeling. The anxiety of driving there, right? Now you're driving faster, traffic really irritates you now. The slow person in front of you that's taking forever to do their turn is driving you nuts. Whereas if you gave yourself an extra 10 minutes, like you could drive there in a calm, relaxing state, maybe be listening to some things that you like on the radio, just things like that that, like you said, people don't think of as stress, actually are. And then something that I wanted to touch on is also there was some research done about how we perceive stress really affects our bodies. So basically, if you know that you're under stress and you perceive stress as a really bad thing, like I believe stress is really bad for me and I know that I'm stressed, I have a much higher likelihood of having it influence my body in negative ways. Whereas if I'm under stress, the same amount of stress, but my attitude towards stress isn't bad. Like if I believe stress isn't bad for me, and there's actual research on this that shows that people are way less likely to have negative impacts on their body. So again, it's your thoughts, right? It's our brains and the way that we think and the way that we perceive things. So it's also just being mindful of what thoughts are going through your mind every day. What are you telling yourself every day? What are you saying to yourself inside your brain every day? Because those thoughts are also creating stress inside the body.
I'm so happy that you touched on that because I think the power of positive thinking is so underrated. Like I know this, I'm so in tune with my body and I'm sure you would know this too, is like whenever you're even just around somebody that you know is not in that positive mindset. And like, let's be serious. Not everybody is going to be in that chipper, happy, go lucky mood all the time. That's not realistic and can somewhat be annoying sometimes when you are, right?
Yes, again.
But when you're around people who you can tell have that mindset of just like, this has happened to me because of this. I am now this because of this. That negative mindset is just so sucking of all of your energy and patience and desire to even want to be around that person. And I know from experience, like there was a time in my life where I let my thoughts control part of my life. And that was a time where my anxiety was so high, I had no ounce of confidence whatsoever. This was a time in my life that I hope I never get back to. And something I try to work away from all the time, but it's identifying that that's not, an ideal way of living, a state of mind that you want to stay in, because it's just so draining and it's creating more stress on the mind, on the body. And I think people just need to think about like you said, just checking with yourself, really listening to what's going on, like your thoughts physically, emotionally, and just try to, make step-by-step changes to better support your body and helping to reduce your stress.
Yeah, like our thoughts and our body, like they work together, right? We always like to look at things in the body as separate, and everything is so interconnected. So what we think actually does affect our body physiologically. And if people want to look up more information on this, I highly recommend Dr. Joe Dispenza. And it's all science backed. And that's why I love him. It's not, people think of mind stuff as a bit woo-woo, but all of his stuff is completely science backed. They do brain scans and everything, right? They just show basically how powerful our mind is and our thoughts are, and how our thoughts impact the body, and vice versa. If your body is feeling very stressed, like I was saying, that the tight muscles, the shoulders, you're working with your shoulders up to your ears, you're clenching your jaw, that is sending a signal to your body and your mind that you're not safe. And that's going to influence your thoughts. And it's a two-way street, right? It's all very interconnected. You can't look at them as separate. And I just think that's so neat, right? That everything is interconnected and everything is relying on everything else. So kind of, you can't ignore one area. You have to kind of look at them all, because they all matter when it comes to stress.
Exactly. And that's why we did this 2-part podcast series, is because when you're looking to heal or treat or support anything in the body, it is not just a one area approach. When you're looking at stress, hormones, it is that trifecta, that literally whole body approach that you need to be looking at and addressing to support your body. So in terms of stress, that is, a direct impact and is connected to our endocrine system. So can you talk a little bit about the endocrine glands that are involved in stress? And also, I think some people might relate and understand this a little bit better when they hear the word adrenal and adrenal fatigue. So can you dive into that as well too?
Yeah, so I would say the adrenal glands play a huge role when it comes to stress. So for those listening that don't know what adrenal glands are, they're like little walnut-shaped glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they're responsible for secreting all of our stress hormones. They have a really important job to do, right? And because the way that we live, we basically are secreting those stress hormones all day long. The adrenal glands get sluggish over time and they get tired and they get fatigued. And that's what's known as adrenal fatigue. So I think a lot of people have heard the term fight or flight. Well, you can live in fight or flight for a while, but then you'll end up hitting a point of burnout. And I think that point of burnout is just that, like, it goes fight, flight, or freeze. I think people get into that freeze phase when the adrenals get really, really tired and aren't functioning properly because they're not secreting the hormones to keep up with the amount of stress. And the other thing that the adrenal glands do is they help us cope with stress. Those hormones that they secrete, they really help us to cope. So when they're not working properly, now our ability to cope lessens. And now if our ability to cope lessens, now we're more reactive to everything, right? So basically you hit that, it goes fight, flight, or freeze. And now you're in that, like, I'm bottomed out. Like, people that have adrenal fatigue, they can't exercise. They can't, like, they're exhausted. They are just mentally, physically, emotionally, completely exhausted. And it takes a while to really come back from that because it is a real condition. And unfortunately, it doesn't take that much to get there. Like, I don't want to scare people, but it's just something to be mindful of, that we really do need to make sure that we are looking after our stress. And then because the adrenal glands are also on the same axis as the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus in the brain, there's all sorts of different things that can be affected, right? Our hormones can be affected when our adrenals are affected. There's a real tight relationship between the thyroid and the adrenal glands. So usually when one is out of balance, the other one will be out of balance. So if you're suffering with a thyroid issue, you also really need to be looking at your adrenals and doing some things to support your adrenal glands, and vice versa. If you have adrenal issues, you're very likely also having thyroid issues. So that's just something to be mindful of as well.
Yes. And in an ideal world, I mean, we want to be able to say we could just remove whatever causes us stress in our life. And sometimes we can, whether it's like situational, our jobs, we could change jobs. It might be somebody in our lives. It's a relationship that we can, close that chapter off. Sometimes we can walk away from the things that cause us the most amount of stress, but it's super unrealistic to say that we can just, push everything out and we'll have no more stress, because it's going to come up in a different way for people, whether it's, they change a job after leaving a very stressful job, but just that transition to a new job is stressful in its own. So just to be realistic, stress is something that we are equipped to deal with. We do have the ability to manage our stress, and we also have to be mindful that we can change the way we react to stress, but also there are many other external factors that can help us manage our stress a little bit better, lifestyle, diet, supplementation. And that is really where we can start when we're looking at stress, because like I said, you can't just remove everything in one day. It's going to take time. So how do we build that foundation up to manage our stress?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is what you were just saying about really looking at our life and looking at how we're living our life. I think that would be the first thing I would say, is just look at the areas that maybe you are creating extra stress for yourself. Maybe by leaving things to the last minute, it's causing you a lot of extra stress. So maybe try not to do that. Try not hitting snooze 100 times in the mornings. There's certain things that we can change, right? And it's like learning who we are as people and learning about ourselves and saying, okay, like, it's the old, like, how's that working for you, right? If it's not working for you, then there are things that we have the ability to change. But like you said, there's so much that's not within our control. So much, whether you have somebody who's sick that you're caring for, or yes, you have young children, or a pandemic happens. There's so much that's outside of our control. And I think one of the important things is to recognize what we can control and what we can't. Change the things you can, and the things you can't, we have to learn to cope with better. We have to learn to to acceptance of what is. So like with the pandemic, I said, it is what it is so many times because that was my mantra. Like, it is what it is. Like, I can't change this. So what can I change? What do I have control over? Well, we always have control over our attitude. We always have control over our choice to be miserable and grumpy or try to be not fake. I'm not suggesting people fake being happy when they're not. I think it's more important to be real, but just like, it is what it is, just kind of making choices as to how we want to view things. And then I think something that's really overlooked because most people say they don't have time for it. And I totally understand that, but is like making time for some sort of a mindfulness, something that's going to help you manage stress. So whether it's yoga or Tai Chi is supposed to be really good for managing stress, meditation, like a mindfulness practice, maybe prayer, if that's your thing, just sitting in stillness with a journal and just like writing out kind of what you're feeling, just like making time for, I think a lot of us will make time for exercise. A lot of us will take supplements. A lot of us will try to prioritize our diet and nutrition. But I think that a lot of people don't prioritize doing something that's calming to the central nervous system and something that's calming for the mind. Like, how are we exercising our mind, right? And just trying to find time to fit in some sort of practice that I think is helping you. It's going to help you cope with stress. It's going to help your reaction to stress. So maybe that you're not going to be as reactive as you would have been in the past. I think it's going to help you be more present and be in a calmer state, right? We all know how we react when we're not in a calm state versus when we are in a calm state. And so what practice can we do in our life that's going to help bring us into a calm state and bring our nervous system back down to that parasympathetic mode instead of living in fight or flight or the sympathetic nervous system mode, right? So I think we all need something that's helping us get into parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. Like, how do we get there? And I think those are the things that are missing in a lot of people's lives because we all tell ourselves we don't have time.
I think time is the excuse that everyone can relate to. And also, like, not even necessarily, like, some people will say, I can't do that because I don't have this amount of time. It's like, well, you do, but it just means that you're compromising something else. And something that I've been so guilty of is I'll be like, yep, I'm going to have a nice bath and just like kind of like take my time to, read something or whatever. And I'll get in the bath and then I'll put on a podcast or I'll put on something on my screen that I'm watching Netflix. And although like, yes, that's very relaxing, it's still very stimulating. Like, you're still like actively doing something. So people need to stop doing something or anything for just a short amount of time. And, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that is not a stretch for making that time for someone. It's just that you have to want to make that change for yourself. You have to want to reduce your stress. You have to want to progress your wellness journey. And if you don't want those things, then, all of these other things we talked about in terms of symptoms and signs, they're going to arise and they're going to cause issues. And then you're going to think back and wonder where you could make these changes. So we're telling you right now today for our listeners, like, start to make these changes and prioritize your health right now. It's not asking a whole lot. And I think if you're working with any type of holistic or natural practitioner, they're going to tell you the same thing. Like, you have to bring down that stress level. You have to get away from all of the stimulation to really, really make a change in reducing your stress.
Yeah. And it's not easy, right? And I think people believe it has to be this big thing. And as you were saying, you recommend to clients, start with 3 minutes a day because there's no excuse for that, right? Every single person can find 3 minutes in their day to sit in stillness or to meditate or to do some yoga poses or whatever you find really calming for you. Like, there's just no excuse when you start with 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be an hour-long practice. Maybe that's something you will work up to because you'll find that you're getting such positive effects from it. But for me, if I'm going to start anything new like that, I have to set my goals. It has to be something really small because it's like a daily promise to yourself, right? So if you're going to make a daily promise to yourself, don't make it something that's so big that you're going to set yourself up for failure. Just make it something really simple. And we're not trying to add more stress by throwing in a whole bunch of stuff because that's just going to make you more stressed. I know it does for me if I think about taking on something really big. It's the same as nutrition, right? You don't start changing everything. You don't rip everything out of your pantry and throw everything in the garbage. And maybe some people do and that works for them. But most people, it's like, let's start with just drinking more water. And you break it down into like small little bites that people, and then once that habit is mastered, then we can move on to the next level. And I think that's more sustainable. And I think it's the same thing with a mindfulness practice, right? Start small. Don't set yourself up for failure. Don't start with, I'm going to do 20 minutes, because you probably won't. Start with 3.
Absolutely. And we talked about this in part 1 about the diet and how, following a specific diet and having these guidelines actually can create more stress and more harm for someone than it can be for good. And I know with my practice, when I'm starting to see clients, the very first thing we talk about is, water, 3 main meals a day, and, eating your food not in front of a screen. And it's like, I always get someone like every couple of weeks, someone's always like, those are too easy. It's like, okay, well, they're too easy, but are you doing them? Mm-hmm. Like, is that already in your routine? And it's like, well, no, but I need something a little bit harder. It's like, no, when we're constantly trying to like change all of these things or have all of these, guidelines or regulations in our lives, it's just creating so much stress, because when we don't follow that and consistently, meet that demand for ourselves, we feel like we failed ourselves. And that is another stress as well, like that lack of meeting the expectation for yourself. So keep it simple, eat nourishing meals, eat meals that make you feel good, make you feel energized, make you, fully digest your food that you're eliminating every single day. Like, really, when it comes to diet, don't think that it needs to be one specific way. I will say there are certain, situations and certain clients where they may require something that's a little more rigid, depending on, all their lifestyle issues that we're trying to navigate through. But if you're listening right now and thinking that you're so caught up on following this one trend or following this one way of eating, just make it simple. Keep it as simple as you possibly can.
Yeah, I feel like people want a lot of rules around food. They want a meal plan, right? I hear that all the time. Just give me a meal plan. Just tell me what to do. Tell me what to eat. And it's like, but that's not sustainable. That's not something that's going to help you in the long term, because these strict meal plans, you're going to follow it for a couple of weeks, and then you're going to completely fall off the wagon because it's not sustainable. You can't follow it. Nobody can follow, rigid eating plans like that for very long. I'm like you. I want to help people learn the habits, learn the lifestyle habits, practice the habits that are going to like help them over the long term, and they can stick to, and that they can incorporate into life, right? Living, like, we have to live, we have to have a life. So, and those rigid meal plans just they just cause more stress, and you're not going to digest your food if you're in a state of stress.
For sure. So we talked about huge lifestyle factors and diet, which are 2 of the most foundational pieces to supporting your stress. But for those people that are looking for that extra support through a supplementation, what would be your recommendations?
Yeah, so there's lots of different things we can do as far as supplements. I love B vitamins. I'm amazed at how many people aren't taking that foundational nutrient. Like, B vitamins are so good for helping us to better cope with stress. I love magnesium. I think magnesium is another one that most people are deficient in, that we're not getting enough from our food. And I think magnesium has a huge calming effect on the body. So I really love magnesium. And essential fatty acids. So just making sure that you're eating healthy fat. If you're not getting enough healthy fats in your diet, especially omega-3s, maybe supplementing with high quality fish oil, I think is a great idea. And then one under the Womensense brand that's really great for stress and for helping the adrenal gland specifically is called AdrenaSense. So it contains a bunch of adaptogen herbs. And what adaptogens are is they basically help your body come back into balance. They just help your body better cope and better adapt with what's being thrown at it. So if you're revving really high, taking adaptogen herbs are going to calm your system. If you're running way too low, they're going to just bring you up to where you need to be. So I love that they work with your body, and they just bring your body where your body needs to go. So this formula was developed by a naturopathic doctor. Her name's Dr. Karen Jensen. She had a practice in Victoria, BC. She's retired now, but she focused in her practice mainly on stress and adrenal health. So this product was formulated by her. I've used the product for many years. I love it. I think it really helps when you notice that you're having maybe a a reaction to stress that maybe is out of character for you. So if you're overreacting, I'd say, so if you, and this is not somebody else telling you you're overreacting, this is you noticing that you're overreacting to something that normally wouldn't make you that agitated. I think that's a sign that maybe you need a product like AdrenaSense, because it's really going to stop that irritation, stop that sense of that feeling of like nervousness. It's going to be really nourishing to the adrenal glands. It's going to help bring things back into balance, just helping you to cope better, helping you to feel better. It's also really good for stamina. So like if you're noticing that your stamina isn't where it needs to be either, if you're really tired, really fatigued, it's going to help lift you, give you a little bit more energy. Sleep, it will like inadvertently help with sleep problems as well. It's a great formula.
Now, in our first episode, we talked about how one of the biggest imbalances of hormones is from also an impact on stress. So for those who may be interested in taking the AdrenaSense that are dealing with hormonal imbalances, can they also take the AdrenaSense?
They can, yeah. So the 4 key hormone products we have are AdrenaSense, MenoSense, ThyroSense, and AdrenaSense. And they were all created to work synergistically together so that people can take all 4 together at any given time or pick and choose between them. They can take 1, they can take 2, depending on where they're at in their life and kind of what support their body needs. But yeah, you can definitely take, so if somebody's taking ThyroSense, for example, they have a low thyroid issue going on, I would also really recommend they take AdrenaSense alongside of it, because what I said earlier, how the adrenal glands and the thyroid gland really are interconnected. So if one is imbalanced, the other one's likely experiencing an imbalance as well. And people actually will notice, even if you did nothing for your thyroid and you just took AdrenaSense, that the thyroid starts to heal. So it's really interesting, right? So if someone's taking AdrenaSense to help naturally balance out their hormones, they can also take AdrenaSense to help kind of target the adrenal glands and nourish them. And that's going to inadvertently help support their sex hormones as well and help kind of everything become more balanced. And I think in menopause, it's super important to be nourishing the adrenal glands. And that's because when the ovaries start shutting down in menopause, they start shutting off production of hormone. The adrenal glands are taking over that important job. So what's happening, I think, by the time women hit menopause is the adrenals are sluggish and tired from years and years and years of stress, that they're not up to the job of also now secreting our sex hormones when the ovaries are shutting down. So if you're someone that's approaching that menopause time, or you're in menopause now, definitely take something like AdrenaSense as well as your MenoSense to help nourish the adrenal glands. And that will help with the menopause symptoms too, because it's just going to help the adrenals secrete your sex hormones while your ovaries are slowing down.
Now, you mentioned the ThyroSense and being able to use that in combination with the AdrenaSense, as well as the 2 MenoSense and also EstroSense. Now, would somebody need to go and get some tests done before taking the ThyroSense, or is it something that is safe for anyone to take?
They can. So sometimes what happens is people will go on ThyroSense when they have subclinical thyroid. So they go to their family doctor, they suspect maybe they have a thyroid issue, or they're just having symptoms and they have no idea what it is. Oftentimes a doctor will test a woman's TSH is the first thing they'll test, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and they'll check the levels. And then they'll tell the patient, oh, no, your thyroid level's fine. You don't need to worry. At that time, somebody can start taking ThyroSense, but it's so safe that somebody could even take it if they're having symptoms, because the problem with the blood test that the doctor does is the reference ranges are too high. So what happens is, I believe you're not diagnosed with having hypothyroidism until you're at like your TSH is at a 5.5. But what happens is that a lot of women will start showing symptoms when they're at like a 2. But a doctor will say, yeah, check your thyroid was fine because your thyroid wasn't at 5.5 yet. But women are having cold hands and feet, their hair's falling out, they feel like crap, they have brain fog, they're tired all the time, they're gaining weight. So they know something's going on with their body. Someone like that that's having symptoms of low thyroid, and you can even Google it, and you can Google all the symptoms. There's so many. If you suspect you might have a thyroid issue, I do recommend you go to your family doctor, or if you have a functional medical doctor, I think think that's even better because they'll do a whole panel for you. And there's a lot of other thyroid hormones besides just TSH that we need to be looking at. TSH is only one very small part of the picture. And most family physicians will only check that one thing. So if you have a functional medical doctor that you can work with, I really recommend that because they'll do a whole panel, take a look what's going on with your thyroid. But if you want to just start with taking ThyroSense and see if you feel better, it's not going to hurt you. The only thing people need to be aware of, it is for low thyroid only, which is hypothyroidism. It's not for hyperthyroidism. So if you have a high thyroid, don't take ThyroSense because it might make it a bit worse, right?
That's so good. And I love that that's like that trifecta that really can support the whole body in dealing with stress and with hormonal imbalances, making sure the thyroid is functioning optimally. So that is fantastic. Are there any additional tips that you want to share with our listeners that can help them manage their stress or their hormones or their thyroid?
I think just going back to, let's just reiterate the things that we talked about with lifestyle, because I think those things are super, super important. So like before you're even going to go to the health food store and get a supplement, look at your lifestyle. Look at the bare basics like sleep. Oh my goodness, we need to get people sleeping better. So just looking at your sleep, we all know how we function on lack of sleep. Very poorly for most people, right? Our brain's not working quick enough. We feel sluggish. We feel tired. We reach for stimulants where, you just don't feel well. So just trying to really make it a point to get to sleep. Don't stay up and do revenge. What is it? Revenge procrastination at bedtime, whatever they call it. Don't do that. Go to bed. Be like your own parent and put yourself to bed. I have to say that to myself sometimes. I'm like, stop scrolling Instagram and go to bed, right? You have to be your own, you have to parent yourself. You have to be your own parent if you're an adult, and you have to tell yourself, no, I need to go to bed. And you know how much sleep is optimal for you. But I think most people need at least 7 hours, if not 8 to 9. But I know for me, my magic number is 8. I feel great on 8. I can get by fine on 7, but anything less than 7, I really feel it. So sleep is a big one, proper nutrition, right? Adequate protein, good healthy fats, fruits and vegetables, hydration, make sure you're drinking enough water, movement, make sure that you're moving your body. Our bodies were meant to move. Human connection, make sure that you have connections with other humans, make sure that, especially now that we're allowed to again, make sure that you're getting out with your friends and family and hugging as many people as you can, since we haven't been able to do that, physical touch is also super important for humans. Supplementation when you need it. Go visit your local health food store. If you live in Peterborough, please go visit Joanne's place. Super knowledgeable staff at health food stores that are trained and are nutritionists and know how to help you and recommend the right supplement for you. And then meditation, mindfulness, like a yoga practice or something that is going to help with your mind and your nervous system, and just with your outlook on life, right? Try to look for what brings you joy. Like look for things, like we don't play nearly enough in life. Life is so serious all the time, right? Like what really kind of exploring that within yourself, like what brings me joy. And for me, like I realized recently, it's been over a year since I've read a book, and I love to read. So I just ordered a book because we're on vacation next week, and I'm going to read, and a book, like a fun book, not like I read serious books all the time, but this one's just for pleasure, right? Like what do you do just for pleasure, just for joy? What brings you joy? My dog brings me so much joy. I love watching him play with other dogs. My children bring me joy, like spending time doing something with them. So I think just like looking for those things in your life that really make you smile and really make you present. Like there's certain things for me, like with my dog, like I feel really present when I'm with him. And I think it's because he's an animal, and there's something just about being with an animal, I think, that brings us into the present moment, because I'm just so present when I'm with him. I'm not thinking about my to-do list. I'm not, right? Whether I'm petting him or watching him play with another dog, I'm just like, I'm there, I'm watching it. I'm smiling. It's joyful watching dogs play together. So just finding things in your life that give you meaning and that bring you joy, I think something lacking for a lot of people.
I agree with all of those points, especially the dog points. I don't have any kids, but my kids are my dogs. And it's so like it just brings you so much joy. Like you can't help but smile. They're so happy when you're there and happy to see you throw the ball and just like be happy too. Like dogs know when you're happy. So I can completely relate to that.
Yeah, they're so simple. They're just so simple, right?
Exactly. We have covered a lot of information in this podcast, as well as part 1, which we talked about hormonal imbalances. So if you have missed part 1, please be sure to go back and take a listen. There's a lot of great information and tips and tricks in there to help you balance your hormones. So although we covered a lot of information, we really want to make sure that you're not adding too much stress to your life right now. Start with just the simple little things that you can change right away. Maybe that's just having that 3 minutes a day, or maybe it's having one positive thought throughout your day rather than having more of that negative mindset. It will really make such a difference. So thank you so much, Jenn, for being on these 2 episodes with us and sharing all of your knowledge with our listeners. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lots of fun. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thanks again, Jenn. If you guys are still here, I have one more valuable piece of information to share with you. If you resonated with the conversation that Jenn and I had about how strongly women's hormones and stress are connected during the transition of the menopausal state, I have an amazing offer for you. On July 29th, I am hosting a Managing Your Menopause webinar where I'll be talking about how to recognize what stage of menopause you are in, educating you on what happens to your body and hormones as you transition through perimenopausal, menopause, and postmenopause, and how to supplement with natural herbal remedies to help this transition be a little bit smoother by relieving some of those symptoms, as well as talking about bone density, metabolism, and so much more. So if you're interested in joining this webinar, you can click the link below to register or visit joannesplace.ca/events to register there. You guys know what to do here. Please subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss any notifications as soon as a new episode is released. And be sure to share on social media that you're listening to the Wellness on Purpose podcast.